Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. So, very good morning to you, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. Well, it's the scheme we have all been talking about for some time now, and following the approval of Ireland's CAP strategic plan this week, the green light has been given to the new Acres Agri-Environmental Scheme. So what does the new scheme look like, and what are the opportunities for farmers? And to explain this new scheme and to answer your questions, I'm delighted to be joined this morning by John Muldowney, who is head of the Agricultural and Environmental Structures Division in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, a colleague of John's, Mark Crosbie, Assistant Principal Officer, and Pat Morrisson, who's Agricultural Inspector, also with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And we are joined by our own Keena, who's Countryside Management Specialist, who's going to help us with questions a little later on. But John, maybe just if you could introduce yourself to us, and you're going to give us a presentation on the new scheme. You're now leading that relatively new to that new role. You've been working very diligently on developing this new scheme for the last number of years, I guess.
Right, Mark, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so we've been busy at this over the last, I guess, the lead in the CAP strategic plan has probably been more than 2 years now at this stage. Obviously, the agri-environmental programme, Acres, as we're now calling it, replaces the old GLAS. It is a very significantly funded scheme in terms of the CAP. It's a pillar scheme in terms of what's there. And I guess it's more data-driven than ever before in terms of the data layers that we brought in from National Parks and Wildlife and EPA in terms of water quality. So we're trying to better ensure the right action in the right place in this scheme. And we hope that there's a good uptake with farmers in terms of, I guess, the scheme that we have to offer.
Well, there's a lot of experience there, isn't there, from the REP scheme, the AOS and GLAS and REAP more recently. So yeah, no, look, we're I think a lot of interest in today's webinar. Mark, you're based in Johnstown Castle and responsible for a lot of the payments, I believe, in relation to Acres.
Yeah, I'm on the admin side, financial and system issues. I've been working on GLAS and I've worked on REAP, and REAP was a great lead-in project to Acres. We learned a lot from REAP, and we've built in those findings into this new scheme. So yeah, so it's all interesting and a lot to offer.
Great. And Pat, you're working on the agricultural inspector side and based in Johnstown Castle, is that right?
Yeah, Mark. So I've been involved in developing the specifications for the Acre scheme over the last few months. So I'm glad to say that the final version of the specifications will be going up on the website this morning or sometime today. So we've been busy with that for the last while.
Great. And Catherine, you've been working very hard with advisors and specialists over the last few months now, preparing for the opening of the scheme. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening there within Teagasc?
Yeah, well, I suppose, and you've just mentioned there was a couple of initiatives that have led to this, like the results-based CIPs and the REAP scheme in particular is kind of getting us ready, because there is a momentous change moving from all action-based to some results-based payments. But you know, advisors are well capable of taking up the challenge. They really took to REAP amazingly well, and you know, are superb people to be getting the right message out to farmers.
Thanks, Catherine. And so, look, today is going to be, John, you're going to give us a presentation about the scheme. We do anticipate a lot of questions around, obviously there's huge interest in this new scheme, and we will do our best to try and get through as many of them as possible. But there will be other opportunities for particularly agricultural advisors and consultants to have their questions addressed. Maybe we just mention that now, John, just in advance of the presentation. There is a session you're planning, I understand.
Yeah, no, that's correct. So as Pat mentioned, we have the final version of the specifications that's ready to put on the website there today.
Great. Thanks for that, John. So look, without further ado, I'm going to ask John if you could share your screen with us and we'll go through the presentation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. So again, we've done our introductions already, so we'll just dive into the presentation. Overall, I guess the key question is, what is Acres? Acres is the Agri-Climate Rural Environment Scheme. It's a flagship scheme within the CAP strategic plan worth 1.5 billion. It replaces the old green low carbon agri-environmental scheme that was there running since 2014 to 2022. And overall, this new scheme is building on the learnings from GLAS, previous agri-environmental schemes like REPS and AOS as well, the results-based agri-environmental pilot called REAP, and the EIP projects that are out there. As I mentioned, the funding is 1.5 billion. It's bigger than any ever funding for the agri-environmental previously, and it's to cover the period 2023 to 2027. So there's funding there for about 50,000 participants to join in the scheme. The scheme then is split into two areas, which I'll go into: Acres General, where we have a target of 30,000 participants that'll have an average payment of 5,000 up to a max of 7,300. And the Acres Cooperative, which again, I'll go into more detail later on, a target of 20,000 participants across 8 zones with a max payment of 10,500 and an average of 7. So how does Acre differ from GLAS? Well, I guess principally it's the structure that's there. While it's still one scheme, there's 2 individual streams in it. The Acres Cooperative is basically, it's 8 zones, mainly down the western seaboard. I have a map of that to show you. And it's basically these zones been identified on the basis of certain environmental criteria, such as high status water sites, the Natura 2000 network across the country for biodiversity, SPAs for the protection of birds. Some of the bigger EIPs that we had, such as the Henna Harrier, the Pearl Mussel, the Burn scheme, they're all integrated into this in terms of taking the learnings from those results-based schemes that have been so successful over the last 5 to 10 years and trying to scale it up onto a bigger national scale. And then we have the Acres General stream, which is more mirrors the GLAS that was there previously. And I'll go into that. That's available for farmers that are outside of that. In terms of, I guess, another key difference is, like GLAS, the majority of the actions that are in Acres are prescription-based actions where payment is made for satisfactory completion of individual tasks. And a farmer can choose any number of tasks up to maxing out the payment at 7,300. But there's also then the introduction of these results-based actions where the payment rate is dependent on the score, the quality of the habitat. And I'll try to explain that in a little bit more detail later on. And the big advantage of results-based actions is that there's no prescription, hard and fast prescription. It's more flexible to what the farmer is doing, but basically you're paid in terms of the quality of the habitat that's upon your farm. In terms of the Acres General actions, overall, there's 31 general actions available. Like GLAS, they range between area-based actions, linear actions, unit-based actions. So area-based actions, we have 14 of those. They could be like low input grassland. This is the results-based action. Farmers have to identify grassland that has, I guess, a mix of non-ryegrass species in terms of both grasses and then a broad range of indicator species in terms of broadleaf plants. And there's a scoring system, and depending on the score of 1 to 10, you get a different payment rate. Then there's linear-based actions such as the riparian buffer strip or the establishment of new hedges. And then there's unit-based actions such as tree planting, where you're paid per individual tree that's planted on the farm. And then the whole farm actions are ones where they don't apply to any specific area on the farm. So it's such actions as the low emission slurry spreading. So again, the low emission slurry spreading is to try and contribute to improved nitrogen management on the farm and to try and reduce ammonia emissions on the whole thing. So this is a map then in terms of these cooperative zones. So there's 8 of these zones across the country. From Donegal right down to Cork and Kerry, and there's even a zone in Leinster as well in terms of what's there. These zones were identified, as I say, on the basis of the high status water sites, the Natura 2000 maps, and other high nature value indicators that are there. And these zones basically map out an area that we anticipate maybe 20,000 farmers will have access to. There's what's called CP management teams that are put into this to try and assist both farmers and advisors better target the delivery of actions to ensure conservation targets are achieved in these areas. The CP teams, there was a tender earlier on in the year, and 5 teams were successful in this tender, and they've basically been in place since late April this year, doing work in these areas to try and identify the core conservation objectives for this, to try and better deliver, I guess, public good outcomes in terms of water quality, biodiversity, and climate action. And they'll be trying to, I guess, bring those level of conservation objectives right down to farm and field level in terms of what's needed. But the principal point of access for a farmer is still via your local farm advisor, is the first point of contact on any of this. So I guess the next question farmers might be asking is, how can I find out which acres is for me? Well, there's 3 options there in terms of which acres is for you in terms of the general scheme or the cooperative stream access. So you can log on to your own ag food account and go to acres access agreement, and you'll be able to see which area you're in. You could also send a text message to DAFM acres followed by your herd identifier, and that'll respond back to you then to say which, whether you're in the cooperative or general stream. Or you can contact your farm advisor and they'll log on to ag food and they'll see under the acres EOI tab which area you're eligible for. So there are the 3 points of contact. So again, it's directing it back through the farm advisor is able to advise which stream a farmer should be entering into on this. And you don't have a choice. If you're in the acres co-op, you have to participate through that stream, but it's your farm advisor will lead on that piece of work first and foremost. The core requirements of acres, again, similar to GLAS, you have to have an approved acres advisor who will prepare a farm sustainability plan. And participants in the acres cooperation approach must also engage with the cooperation teams, but the first protocol is the farm advisor to, I guess, get the principal application in place, and then further elements of that will be added on over time in terms of lands to be scored and the availability of other what's called non-productive investments and landscape actions. And again, I'll go into those later on. Then there's mandatory training that must be completed by the end of the first year. And the acres CP area will also have additional modules to be delivered through the CP teams in terms of specific conservation objectives that are there and trying to better inform farmers in terms of what's required in those areas. And then lastly, there's the key requirement of record keeping to have the evidence trail that actions are completed and put in place. In terms of the structure then of acres general, we'll go through this first. Again, similar to GLAS, there's a tiered entry system where tier 1 has priority access over tier 2, which in turn has priority access over tier 3. In terms of the priority environmental areas that are in tier 1, again, like previously, these include commonage areas, Natura 2000 sites, geese and swan maps. And there's a number of these priority mapped areas where if these are mapped out on your farm and you select the appropriate action associated with those, then you're in that tier 1 category. And farm advisors will be able to direct on advice in relation to that. Then there's tier 2, where you might necessarily have these priority environmental areas on your holding, but tier 2 covers farmers that wish to do a higher level of environmental engagement, such as engaging on, I guess, tree planting is a core action, or if they have engaged in the native woodland element of the National Forestry Scheme, that would get you into tier 2 access. Additionally, if you're in what's called vulnerable water areas, where on the Water Framework Directive, they have identified priority areas of action, and we've mapped off a portion of these to be very vulnerable because they have agricultural pressures in the priority areas of action. So it's trying to address those issues. And again, if you select appropriate action, you'll activate that tier 2 level. And lastly, within tier 2, then it's for the more, I guess, progressive farmers that are typically at a more moderate to higher stocking rate than others, or have more than 30 hectares of arable land on their holding. If they take on a list of shortlisted actions, again, they can activate that tier 2 status. And after that, then it's a free for all in terms of the general actions that are there. So intake into acres will be via a phase basis via tranches, subject to DAFM and advisor capacity. And currently tranche 1 is open. Farm advisors are able to be working on this. The submit button for plans isn't available yet, but the system is open and advisors are able to be working on this system. Tranche 2 then will be open for a similar period this time next year. And there'll be a possibility then of Tranche 3 depending on uptake levels that we have received. And those that are entering Tranche 1 in terms of their applications now, they'll receive, if they're successful, they'll receive a start date of the 1st of January 2023. And if we're oversubscribed, there'll be a ranking and selection process will apply as well. And again, that's outlined in more detail in the terms and conditions. Then moving on to the cooperation measure in terms of the structure of the action. So again, this varies from what the general scheme is. So principally, payments in this area are made up of 3 types of payments, and I'll go into these in more detail later on. But firstly, you have the results-based payments, and typically we have a peatland scorecard, grassland scorecard, and a woodland scorecard, and you can, I suppose, achieve payments of up to €7,000 for the results-based element of your farm plan. And then after that, there's additional voluntary actions in terms of landscape actions and non-productive investments that you can take on in those. And there's a number of examples there in terms of what these non-productive investments or landscape actions are trying to do. So the non-productive investments, they're more individual and farmer-led. Advisors will be able to do the application for those, whereas the cooperation or landscape actions, while they're still individual farmer-led, very often the cooperation team will be coordinating these across a larger landscape area, such as trying to manage fire prevention in a landscape basis or flood prevention measures in a landscape basis. In terms of the high-level co-op team roles, I guess there's a question out there in terms of what are these CP roles, what are they doing that's different to farm advisors, given that you're still approaching the farm advisor first? Well, the co-op team roles, they're going to be in place on the ground. They're trying to model themselves on what the EIP groups would have done. So it's trying to facilitate that local bottom-up approach in terms of development of additional actions for the area in terms of non-productive investments and landscape actions. So they'll develop local action plans that basically try and consolidate conservation objectives for these zones in terms of the priorities that are there, and try and better understand what are the, I suppose, the drivers of damage in the local area in terms of that might be undermining the conservation status of some of these. So they'll be working to develop these local action plans. They'll be liaising with farmers, National Parks and Wildlife, the law pro officers in the area and other NGOs in terms of trying to better understand delivery of conservation objectives. They'll be trying to build capacity to engage locally with farmers and to support the provision of public good landscape related to biodiversity, water quality, and climate action. You know, trying to improve that level of information and how the various, I guess, biodiversity and water challenges are understood at farm and landscape level to try and deliver more outcome through individual farms. They'll improve the two-way communication and dissemination of local level conservation objectives between farmers and the policymakers. They'll be there to better support farmers deliver environmental goods in these sensitive landscapes, and they'll act as advocates of what farmers are doing to protect the environment with local communities and the importance of an active living farming community to deliver these conservation objectives. And additional to that, then they'll be trying to monitor and evaluate the quality of farm plans, the, I suppose, habitat scoring and improvements that will be happening over time, and overall outputs of what Acres Co-op can deliver in terms of quality outcome to try and ensure better value for money in terms of what Acres is providing, but also feeding into national reporting requirements for water quality and biodiversity reporting. So I guess moving on now, a key element that I have mentioned quite a number of times is results-based payments, and people might be wondering what this is about. So overall, this is payments for environmental quality, so that two adjacent farms, depending on the quality of the, I suppose, the habitat that's on the ground, you get a different payment. And this is similar to the approach that you already see in farming circles in terms of you have, I suppose, your grid structure in terms of when farmers send animals to the factory, and the higher the grading animal gets a higher payment per kilogram than the lower grading animal. And it's the same principle then when we go into this habitat quality. So the idea is it's a quality-based payment system for environmental good. It's a scorecard-based system looking at low input grasslands and low input peat grassland in terms of, I suppose, the abundance of indicator species that highlight the habitat is in good quality and delivering for biodiversity or water quality. And the higher the score, the higher the payment. And you can see the payment scale there in terms of low input grassland. So depending on where you are within that, that's the range that might be there. So the farmer earnings are determined by the environmental services or the market value, or trying to put a better value on quality. And farmers can see then that they're not comparing that someone in Gloss might have been getting the same payment, but farmers might have been saying, but my grassland is better than yours. This is the opportunity to try and differentiate these. And it also provides that opportunity that no longer in this sort of approach is there a hard and fast prescription. It's more about the correct site selection. And then the farmer continues to do what they're doing with advice from farm advisors and from the CP teams in terms of what will help to improve the score. But the farmer has the flexibility to farm according to the local or individual needs in terms of what's in that area. So it allows that greater level of flexibility rather than the hard and fast prescriptions that would have been typical of previous schemes. So this is a huge innovation. It has been proven to be very successful in the REAP scheme and in a number of EIPs that have utilized this approach. So this is why we're trying to scale up this. And overall, I would say the Commission have very well received this approach in terms of what we're trying to achieve in acres because of this approach, that it is very ambitious in terms of what we're trying to do in this space. So like cattle and sheep, quality pay is. So you see the field here on the left, it's a typical ryegrass field. There's no diversity in terms of what's there. So that would receive a lower score and a lower payment, whereas the one on the right, there's more diversity both in terms of sward structure, but also in terms of variation of species that are within that sward. So there's a higher payment for the right-hand side type field. So I guess overall then in terms of trying to deliver, there's a lot within, I guess, overall acres and trying to bring farm advisors. So we provided farm, I guess, advisor training back in July and again in September in terms of the specifications of all the schemes. We'll be hoping to provide further results-based training in the field next spring or early summer. There's training videos for later playback as well available on the department website, and guides in terms of suitable and unsuitable fields. And there's a species identification guide and booklet as well that's there to help support farm advisors to do this. And like, again, it's on the website, so farmers can also look at this to try and get a better understanding themselves of what this results-based scoring is all about, and to try and better understand what it means and what they should be doing and how to engage. And the species identification booklet here is very useful as well in terms of to help, I suppose, rebuild capacity in farm advisory and at farmers on the ground in terms of understanding the, I suppose, the range of biodiversity that's there in plant life on their holdings. And if you get the biodiversity and plant life in terms of vegetation right, you know, birds and other species will all come in and be able to live within that, birds and mammals, in terms of optimizing that biodiversity right across the ecosystem. So moving on to acres cooperation, and I think it probably deserves a little bit of further explanation as well in terms of the detail that's there beyond the high level, I suppose, roles of the CP teams. So firstly, the complementarity with the general stream actions that are there. So overall, I guess the department clearly acknowledges that some farmers will be in the CP stream because they have maybe a very small part of their holding within that. And because of that, they have to enter the CP stream. So the rule that we have built into the system, if you have 3 hectares or 20% of your holding, whichever is the smaller, gains you access to that CP area with the higher payment ceilings that are in it. So it is beneficial to you. But if you only happen to have, you know, 5 or 10 hectares, you obviously don't have a large area you're holding to be scored using these results-based scorecards. So then you can use the balance of that funds to try and take on additional general actions. So it's only where there is a balance of from the core 7,000 unutilized that you can move on to selecting other actions to build it up. So if you want to take on actions that are on CP lands, say you have a smallish holding and you haven't much space, the 3 actions that we've identified that are compatible without undermining the conservation objectives of CP areas are stone wall maintenance, rare breeds, and low emission slurry spreading in terms of those. So they are 3 that can be applied on the CP lands themselves. However, you also have the option, again, if you're below that 7,000 ceiling, to try and take on other general actions on land that's outside the CP area. So you might have a farmer with 10 hectares inside the CP boundary and a further 10 hectares outside. Well, on the land outside, they're free to select from the general actions on the non-CP lands. I guess another element then is commonage in acres. So primarily, more than 80% of the commonage in the country is covered in the cooperative areas. And it's a mandatory action for any farmer with commonage that they have to participate in this action. So as I say, the majority is in the CP areas, but if you have commonage and you're a non-CP farmer just in the general scheme, you still have to mandatorily engage in the commonage management. Overall, what this means is that, again, the CP teams will be providing a results-based scoring, again, free of charge to farmers. So this will be done on a coordinated basis across all the commonages that the CP teams will do this. So they'll do the scoring of that. If you're outside the CP areas, commonage is, of course, tier 1 access. So again, that helps you to get in, and they're the minimum requirements there in terms of 0.5 of a hectare declared in 2021, and that you continue to farm this in 2022 and beyond. There's a minimum stocking rate then to be taken off the old commonage management plans that are there in gloss, and they'll be reviewed as a result of the results-based scoring. The minimum stocking rates will be reviewed over time then in terms of what's optimum to manage the conservation objectives of the commonage. And overall, the principle in the agreement is that for participants in acres, they're not to hinder or block works that are agreed between the CP teams and the other commonage shareholders in terms of what's there. So everyone is to engage in the process of this, but no one person can block what the majority are trying to do for the benefit of trying to maintain, I suppose, the conservation objectives. And overall, it's the land eligibility, that eligible hectare on the commonage. And in the CP zones, additional actions will be available as well in these areas to aid habitat restoration. So if the scorecard is identifying specific threats or pressures on the commonage, there will be associated non-productive investments or landscape actions to try and help deliver recovery in the commonage areas. So you've heard me say these words of non-productive investments and landscape actions a lot. So these are specific for the CP areas in terms of, I suppose, the work that they're doing. So as I said, they're developing local action plans. Primarily, they're delivering the results-based scoring system in terms of the scorecards that will be completed by farm advisors, and maybe some bespoke scorecards as well if there's some specific issues. Like Corncrake, I believe it needs a separate scorecard to what the 3 core ones that we have. So there'll be a little bit of that. But the CP teams then, they'll be developing these non-productive investments and landscape actions to try and address the threats and pressures that have been identified in the scorecarding system and that are being developed in terms of in coordination, collaboration with farmers on the ground in terms of these local areas. In terms of the MPIs, there's probably going to be a list at present of about 50 different MPIs. So again, in acres general, we have 31 actions. So this will be additional 50 actions that will be there in the CP areas. They'll probably vary by CP zone in terms of what's applicable, and probably from farm to farm in terms of what's applicable, depending on the specific conservation objective. The advisor will be able to apply for these non-productive investments through the DLAMs, so basically through the Farm Sustainability Planning window, and there'll be an application window each year from 2023 onwards. And the MPIs are basically, they're an annual action that you have to add on to your acres plan. And that can vary then from year to year in terms of what's there. Because these sites are very sensitive, the CP teams will screen the proposed MPIs and produce a works plan to try and ensure that the MPIs don't undermine those conservation objectives, and the CP teams will provide approval for the authorised actions, which will have a time-limited period for further delivery. The landscape actions, LAs, will be also delivered locally again by the project officer and local farmers based on those local objectives again to deliver for conservation. At the moment, the CP teams are looking maybe at 10 to 12 standard landscape actions, which are basically a suite of the non-productive investments. So you could see, 7 to 10 non-productive investments would be, I suppose, grouped together to provide a landscape-based action, which the CP teams would try and help the delivery of these actions or the siting of them on a landscape basis across multiple farms, while individual farmers will be doing individual elements of that. And again, applications for these can be throughout the year, and the applications for these landscape actions will be coordinated through the CP teams themselves, and the CP teams will screen the actions, and the actions can be updated annually as well. And between the non-productive investments and landscape actions, there's a budget of 3,500 that's available for these per farmer per year on these. Then local area partnerships. As I say, the CP teams are trying to, develop the principles that were there with the EIP in terms of that bottom-up approach. So there'll be local area partnerships developed to try and learn from, the local farmers, MPWS rangers, law pro officers in terms of trying to ensure the delivery of these conservation objectives, and that everyone is working together in terms of, that it's not all just top down of policy saying you must do this, but it's trying to get that balance of what the local areas feel is important to deliver for the conservation outcomes. These partnerships will also help to develop the training priorities that are within the individual zones. And again, you can imagine some of the zones are quite big, so the training needs could vary from one end of the zone to the other. Advisors and farmers will be involved in the delivery of these training events, and they'll be paid for by the project team to engage in this type of work. And farmers and advisors will be rotated annually as well to try and ensure the maximum number of people get the opportunity to participate in these partnerships and engagement to try and, broaden the capacity as well of people, what you understand in terms of, again, it's what is meant by SACs, SPAs, high water status, and what needs to be done within these areas. Coming down then to the all-important point for farmers, payments. The Department of Agriculture will deliver all payments, whether that's for the CP areas or the general stream. The first instalments will be made in Q4 2023, with the second instalment then in spring 2024. So that's typical of what we've already been doing in GLAS at present. Payments for the MPIs and landscape actions will likely issue at regular intervals throughout the year, depending on when the actions are actually delivered on the ground. And we're also looking at the provision of a front loading of that MPI and landscape action budget in terms of the 3,500 that we acknowledge that some farmers may have a lot of work to do maybe in year 1 or 2, and we need to provide opportunity that you can do that up front rather than being capped to the ceiling completely of 3,500.
We've about 2 minutes left, John.
Okay, I'm just there, Mark. Acres and organics, again, I'll just leave that there. Again, organics is tier 1 status in terms if you're registered with one of the approved controlled bodies. So again, that helps. There is a suite of actions that you can select in acres that help to sort of optimize your payments. But the key thing is on the area-based actions, we have to ensure that we're avoiding double funding situations. So organic farm payments will be reduced if there's some of the actions where that is, but again, that's clearly specified within the individual action itself. And applicants who have commonage have to undertake the mandatory commonage action, even if they're doing the organics. So that's, again, trying to illustrate that mandatory commonage part. The slide here, again, they'll be there for later, but these are the key contacts for the 8 CP zones. And then lastly, the Department of Agriculture contacts in terms of detail. But again, the key point of contact for any farmer is through the farm advisory system in terms of contacting your local farm advisor to try and look at the actions that are there and suitable for the farm. And I guess the one thing we're hearing is, like, there's 31 actions in the general scheme. So there is something for everyone in terms of trying to suit your own farm situation in terms of, whatever type of farm, there's something there for everyone to try and take on. I think that's it from me then. Thank you.
That's great, John. Thanks. And thanks for keeping on time, because it does mean we have plenty of time for questions and answers now. So John, if you could just maybe stop sharing your screen for us. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions so far. We do have a lot of people joining us this morning. So if you are submitting a question, please try and keep it brief, and I'll ask and Mark, Pat to join us, and also maybe if I could ask John and colleagues to keep your responses as concise as possible, so that we can get through as many of the questions as possible. Just before we go on, John, I mean, we didn't get too stuck into the overall objectives of the scheme, but maybe just I think it's worth for a moment, just if I could ask you, if we're meeting on this webinar, we're all still here in 2027, looking back at the scheme. What in your mind is a picture of success of the scheme over the next number of years? If we're looking back on how the scheme has been delivered.
Yeah, well, I suppose like
changes.
Yeah, a key target again, and the Commission was putting a lot of pressure on this, is to try and, I guess, deliver more for the environmental regulations that are out there in terms of the Water Framework Directive. So again, we've tried to build a lot on the data layers that are there from the Water Framework Directive for identifying high status water bodies, vulnerable water bodies, and what you can do to deliver the right action in the right place. The Farm Sustainability Plan system helps to try and provide that information to farm advisors to utilize it, that it's there in a user-friendly manner to try and do that. On the biodiversity, we're targeting maybe to have 30% of, I guess, the PAF, the at-risk sites across the country returned or in a level of improving status. So some people might say that 30% isn't good enough considering the state of biodiversity in the country, but we have to start somewhere. I guess in relation to biodiversity too, we're hoping that the results-based payment system embeds with farm advisors. The feedback to date has been good on that. Again, it's to get the trust and buy-in of farmers as well into that system, of that quality-based scoring system of how it works. There's a lot in that to take on and for farmers to fully understand it, and that move away from prescription to advisory in terms of what's there, trying to give that flexibility back to farmers on the ground. And then in relation to climate action, we have a number of actions there that are trying to, I guess, acres overall is trying to be part of the CAP ambitions of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. But specifically then in acres, we have the low input peat grassland, which is trying to sort of get that reduced management intensity on peat soils that are under agricultural land use to try and reduce those emissions. CP areas will be looking at that peatland management as well. But it's all trying to still maintain that active, viable, vibrant farming community and the role that farmers play to actively achieve these conservation objectives. And I think we want to try and make sure that we maintain that broad role, that it's not just seeing we're trying to close down farming, but it's trying to get the right balance in that space.
Okay, John, we're going to go straight to questions now, because I'm conscious time is ticking and we have over 50 questions have come in already. So, Catherine, I might ask you if you could walk us through some of those questions, and I'll help out as well, because I'm conscious there are a lot coming through there.
Yeah. Question for Pat first about the grey partridge measures, the actions that might apply to the grey partridge. It's not a specific action mentioned this time.
Yeah, so I suppose in acres we've moved away from the species-specific actions, but we have a number of general actions that, when chosen in combination with each other, will benefit the grey partridge. And the two important actions for grey partridge would be the grassland margin arable and the winter bird food strip. So a farmer can select both of those actions side by side, and that is compatible for the grey partridge and very similar to the grey partridge action that was there in GLAS.
Brilliant. Mark, can farmers apply for acres on ag food?
We can't quite hear you there, Mark. Your microphone may be switched off.
Or maybe, yeah.
Can you get me now? You hear me now?
Confirm.
Yeah.
Can farmers apply?
Okay. So I suppose it's important to point out there that all applications, Catherine, come through advisors. It's not directly from the farmer. So we have trained a number of advisors. John mentioned it there, and we have 630 advisors now that have access to our systems. Within the next week or so, that number is going to rise significantly, and we have published a list on our website of acres trained advisors. So, you know, it's there. It's gov.ie/acres. That list is there.
Okay. So yeah, farmers don't apply directly. John Muldowney, maybe a comment about beehives, please, not in the scheme.
Yeah, again, Catherine, this has been one of the key changes, I guess, moving from GLAS. That GLAS had a number of very species-specific targets around the number of specific birds, and again, the bees. And we've tended to try and, they were low uptake actions in GLAS. So again, trying to...
Sorry, John, I think it was the honeybee hives, I think the question was relating to. So I suppose that's a slightly different angle, isn't it?
Okay.
Honeybees, you know, are not necessarily maybe...
Yeah, well, again, we have a broad suite of actions. We don't have something specifically for those, but I do believe the horticulture division have something on apiculture, which is completely separate to us now, but I don't have the details of that, but we can follow up separately to direct them towards what's in apiculture.
Super. Maybe back to Pat. Small streams on my farm, will they qualify for riparian zone measures?
Yeah, so we don't distinguish between the size of water courses. So if there is a small stream, they will be eligible to put a riparian alongside that small stream.
Any consideration given for rewarding farmers for carbon dioxide sequestration?
At this point in time, no, we don't have anything specific on that. But like I understand the department, you know, this is an area that's being explored through climate policy work that's ongoing. In
an SAC block, you can choose 2 hectares of a riparian zone. What other measures can you choose on the remaining hectares in the SAC block?
Yeah, well, first of all, the riparian buffer grassland actions are not allowed on an SAC parcel because there's a mandatory fencing requirement for those actions. And fencing would be an activity that would require prior consent before you could carry it out. So that action is blocked on the SAC on mature layers. But in general, for any actions in a parcel, you can split the parcel and do a combination of actions. There are certain rules about actions you can do in the exact same area, but you are allowed to split a parcel and do multiple actions. Okay.
I've just got my herd number this year, so I don't have a BPS 2021 application. Can I be considered under the scheme?
Well, yeah, again, it's important. The reference year for acres tranche 1 is 2021. So in that particular case, they may need to look into preparation for tranche 2. They'll have a BPS assumably this year, 2022. So that will become the reference year for tranche 2. So I suppose for them, you know, it might be no harm to look at what's there and what's available in the specs and so on and prepare themselves, but the actual application will have to wait.
An opinion that the cooperation zone is incorrect, but I suppose the main question is, can it be changed now?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, we have the systems in place at the moment on the basis of the data layers that are there. These were selected. It was across interdepartmental working group in terms of working on this, and the tenders that were put out for the CP teams were on the basis of those. So unfortunately, we can't change at this point in time.
But I suppose, John, it's fair to say that you would hope the farmer wouldn't be disadvantaged by being, you know, in or out.
If they have designated land, we know that the CP areas probably have maybe 60% of the high status Natura type lands. But that means that there's 40% of Natura type lands outside of the CPs in the general stream, and they are tier 1. So if they have those layers, they won't be disadvantaged.
Okay. And when you mentioned the tiers there was a question about tier 2. Have I a chance of getting in?
Again, I think that question might, tier 2, tranche 1 includes tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So I think the question was, should I wait till next year? No, if you have a tier 2 possibility, you can look at tranche 1 and pitch your application this year.
You might as well be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no guarantees, and that's.
There's no guarantees.
Yeah,
no.
Absolutely.
No,
yeah,
of course. Yeah.
When are the completed terms and conditions available, including the ranking system for CP applicants? We have the other one.
Yeah, we've published draft terms and conditions. They're on our website from yesterday. Now, we don't expect significant differences between what's published there and what will be published within the next week or so. At the application stage, terms and conditions will be available, and there will be a requirement that the advisor signs off on those terms and conditions on behalf of their farmer client. But at the moment, it's worth taking a look at what's there on the site, and the substantial information is there.
Can you confirm that LIG parcels don't require fencing?
I think that it relates to the water courses.
Yes, fencing of water courses, thanks, yeah.
Yeah, so there's no mandatory fencing if you select LIG, but any damage to water course will be assessed in the scorecard. So it's results-based, so there's no prescription that you must do something or you mustn't, but you will be rewarded by what you deliver in the parcel.
Where do the islands fit in? Is there any extra?
Well, a number of the islands are part of the CP zone. So the majority of farmers who have land on the islands will be in the cooperation element of the scheme.
Yes. A concern about coppicing being as it's so drastic, even though it can be good, both the length of it and, that it'll be done in the right place. Just any comment on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose all advisors have been trained. So we give a day and a half of training to all advisors for them to be eligible to send in an application. So I suppose they're professionals, and they will be the people that are selecting the hedgerows that are suitable for coppicing. So I suppose it is down to the advisor and the farmer to select the appropriate hedges.
You mentioned there'll be more advisors available from the 6:30. Any question there from advisors about how soon may they be all up on the system, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, our last advisor training session in Athlone, there's a number of those yet to be added to the system. They'll be, we added a new list this week that brings it up to the 6:30. Within the next week, that figure will increase again. But I think it's important for advisors to ensure that they have done certain, that they have contacted acres and registered their interest. Not all advisors have done that. So if you haven't registered your interest in acres, there are advisors who attended the training but still haven't actually registered their interest, and that's a key requirement. And to do that, that's really through our email, acres@agriculture.gov.ie.
Mark, I might go to you in a minute, but just let one final one for me. Will the Department of Agriculture inspectors be doing inspections, or will it be the CP teams in the acres CP?
Yeah, so it's the Department of Agriculture are the competent authority for carrying out inspections. So the CP teams, they may be doing quality checks or verification checks, but it's only the department officials will be carrying out inspections.
And actually, an easy one there. Who scores the private owned CP?
It's the advisors. So the farm advisors will score the privately owned land.
And following on from that, who scores the commonage both inside and outside the CP?
So the CP teams will be scoring the commonage within the CP, and we're still finalising exactly who will score the commonage outside the CP, but we don't see it at present being the advisors. We see it being the CP teams or someone similar.
Mark, do you want to take over with look through a few, and I'll go through more?
Yeah, maybe just, I suppose, I'm looking at tranches and tiers, and I know some people do get confused about that, and you can understand that. But there's a question here from a farmer, or I'm not sure if it's a farmer, but if a farmer does doesn't get into tranche 1 this year, can the application roll over automatically for tranche 2, similar to TAMS?
Well, the application won't. It's a separate application process for tranche 2. And once we're complete the tranche 1, we'll review the scheme. And there is a possibility of some minor changes in tranche 2. But really, the application has to be made separate for tranche 2.
Okay.
But I guess maybe just add the plan that was in tranche 1 will remain on the system to apply whatever amendments might be necessary.
Absolutely,
so it's in the system.
It could be just a case of updating that for, or indeed maybe not making any changes at all, just resubmitting that next year. Question here from a farmer, tillage farmer, with wondering if he sows a cover crop specific for bird cover for the local gun club. Does this qualify for the bird cover element in acres?
So the species that are eligible for the winter bird food are set out in the specifications. So if they fit in within the species that are listed in the specifications, it's eligible, and if they don't, then they won't.
Okay. If a farmer has peat soils, will it be mandatory that they enter that plot as the low input peat grassland?
No, it's not mandatory. The only mandatory action in the Acres General Scheme is commonage. So all other actions are voluntary.
Okay, if a farmer has a high water, and thanks for the concise responses, we're getting through them here. If a farmer has high water status on their farm with PIP P critical source area, P focused, and this is do they have to choose it? So I'm not really sure what that.
Yeah. So if you have land in high status water catchment in the general scheme, you have the potential to get tier 1 if you pick from a list of appropriate actions, but it's a voluntary uptake of that action. So if you pick the right action that's addressing water in the area that's in the high water catchment, you've the possibility of getting tier 1 access to the scheme.
Okay. Catherine, you might have an answer for the next one there in relation to the costs involved in the specific actions. And do we have any idea of the application costs for somebody who wants to get their plan done by Teagasc?
We do, Mark, and there's a range. There's a range of farm sizes, and then whether it involves a farm visit or not, or in the CP areas, some of the applications are straightforward. So I just can't.
It's best to talk to your individual advisor about that.
I don't want to say the wrong one. And just on that one, can I just ask Pat to confirm there, the biggest query we're getting at the moment is and John spoke about the actions that the farmer in the CP area can make up to make up their money. But can I just confirm that where the advisor is involved in generating those additional actions, that's next year's work? It'll just help advisors at the moment.
Yeah, so I suppose
other than the stone walls at the moment.
Yeah, so there's a distinction, I suppose. A general action is something that's in the specification that are available to the Acres General applicants. CP applicants also can avail of those general actions, okay, but money is ring fenced for the commonage and CP forage lands. So depending on the amount of land you have within the CP area or commonage will depend on whether you'll get paid for general actions. But if there is money available for general actions, they have to be chosen this year when you're submitting your application.
That's for those with the budget left over for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. But so if you're trying to make up, the third group then.
So the other element then is non-productive investments and landscape actions, okay? So they are actions that are one-off applications. So you apply them, you could choose to apply them for 1 year or not. You can, if you don't apply from 1 year, you can apply from the following year. So they're equivalent to what a general action might be, or they might look like them, but it's a 1 year commitment and it's a 1 year payment. And you will get the opportunity to apply for them after your land is scored next summer.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Question here from a very busy advisor up in Donegal, wondering if there's any indication if Tier 2 and 3 applications will be successful in 2022. Any point in submitting Tier 3 plans, given the level of interest, likely interest?
Yeah, I suppose we can't predict how many applications will come in and how many will be Tier 1 or Tier 2. You've a lot less chance of your Tier 3, I would imagine, in Tranche 1. There will be, we think there's going to be very high demand in Tranche 1. So we're not saying don't submit an application. That's up to each individual, but it is probably unlikely, but we can't say for definite a Tier 3 application will be successful in Tranche 1.
And I'm not sure, John, if you confirmed in your presentation that the riparian buffer zone is remaining at 2 hectares, isn't it?
Yes. It's
Yeah.
remaining at 2
Okay.
hectares, yeah.
And again, about large areas designated in geese and swans, but again, Pat, you're after saying there, nothing is mandatory. It's all about getting your chances up. Okay.
Exactly.
And putting the right action in the right place, obviously, but the maps are a guide, isn't that right? They're a guide to the advisor to help us put the right action in the right place.
Exactly, yeah. So there is a huge amount of maps available to advisors on our acres mapping system. And, you know, they can choose to turn off or turn on those layers, and that will guide them to where the right action should go.
Again, can I just come back to I was wondering, had I missed it there, but a question has come in about the ranking and selection for acres CP isn't available yet, just to confirm that it isn't. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's not included in the draft terms and conditions that were put up yesterday evening, but it will be available next week.
Okay.
When the final version of the terms and conditions is available. It's just requires a slight tweak, and so it's just slightly delayed.
There's still lots of questions coming in around the access to GLAM, but the advice is if you're having problems, I think email acres@agriculture.gov.ie. Is that
I think that's about the best. And I suppose we are getting a number of queries, and we are getting to everybody. So if you do have that, but in your response, in your query, if you can give us specific details, your AGT number, your AGY number, those codes will help us look up where you are on the system, and we will get to everybody.
Mark, we're not going to get to all the questions. I'm undertaking to take note of all of them and look after them and get answers to them. And just one important one, maybe, does the farmer carry a risk of having to pay an advisor and the plan may not go through?
I think that depends on the arrangement between the farmer and the advisor of when.
Yeah.
Payments, like there's different local arrangements, I think, in terms of when those services are paid for.
Okay, look, we're just over time, unfortunately, and we do have a lot more questions. So we have these questions recorded on the system. We will download them and see if we can go through them. But obviously, huge level of interest in the scheme. So, look, I want to thank you, John, Mark, and Pat for joining us this morning. And I just want to say final thanks to Yvonne Maher and Andy Boland and Pat Murphy in the background, who are doing a lot of the work in preparation for all of these webinars. So until next Friday, thanks for watching and have a good weekend. Thank you. You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.